On May 1st, 1920, the Swedish royal family was forced to face a terrifying reality. Their beloved crown princess, a woman at the very height of her influence and 8 months pregnant, was suddenly dead. This was Princess Margaret of Connaught, the brilliant granddaughter of Queen Victoria. To the world, she seemed invincible. She had shattered her suffocating Victorian cage, outmaneuvered the British Empire, and led a massive clandestine operation that saved thousands of lives during World War I. Margaret Victoria, Charlotte Augusta Nora, was born on January 15, 1882, at the formidable epicenter of the British Empire. Her birthplace was Bagshot Park in Surrey, a vast, heavily guarded estate steeped in unimaginable wealth. Her father was Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught, the third and favorite son of Queen Victoria herself. Her mother was Princess Louise Margaret of Prussia, a woman of strict German discipline. From the moment she took her first breath, Daisy was more than just a child. She was a high-value, meticulously controlled political asset. Her christening on March 11th of that year was no mere family celebration. It was a geopolitical summit of staggering imperial proportions. Standing around her lace cradle as godparents were the ruthless architects of the modern world. German Emperor Wilhelm I, the future Emperor Friedrich III, and, towering over them all, the matriarch of the empire, Queen Victoria. This overwhelming royal lineage instantly placed the infant at the center of a complex, vicious web of European alliances. Growing up in the direct shadow of Queen Victoria meant a life dictated by paralyzing, uncompromising etiquette. The Queen was famous for her total control, keeping scrupulously detailed dossiers and diaries on all her grandchildren. For Queen Victoria, her granddaughters were the ultimate currency. They were raised for one specific, clinical purpose: to create strategic, arranged marriages with foreign kings and emperors. They were expected to be beautiful, obedient, and absolutely passive. They were human chess pieces, groomed to be traded across the map for border security and the consolidation of British power. Queen Victoria adored Daisy, but it was a heavy, demanding love. The Queen demanded absolute perfection, and any deviation from the royal script was met with icy disapproval. But Margaret possessed a mind that categorically refused to be confined by corsets and curtsies. While she underwent the grueling, monotonous education mandatory for a British princess, mastering multiple languages, absorbing thick volumes of history, and learning the fine art of silent diplomacy, her true rebellion was hidden in art. In a world obsessed with maintaining a rigid, flawless image, Margaret sought the raw, unpolished truth. She was a deeply talented artist. She didn't just view the world through the narrow, protected glass of a royal carriage. She analyzed it with the sharp, vivid eye of an impressionist painter. She understood light, color, and the untamed beauty of nature in ways that were unthinkable in the sterile, predictable halls of Buckingham Palace. But her most extraordinary and modern passion was the camera. Long before photography became a mass obsession, Margaret became a passionate photographer. In the late 19th century, photography was a messy, chemical, and mechanical process, completely unbecoming of a fragile royal lady. Yet, Margaret insisted on mastering it. She hauled heavy wooden cameras into gardens, developing films that portrayed her family not as untouchable deities, but as living, breathing, imperfect humans in candid moments. Her lens captured a reality the crown usually tried to hide. By the early 1900s, Queen Victoria had passed away, and the international press was in an absolute frenzy over the new generation of royals. According to newspaper archives of the time, Margaret and her younger sister, Patricia, were considered the most beautiful and desirable brides in all of Europe. The world held its breath, constantly guessing which powerful, aging monarch would claim them. It seemed inevitable that Margaret would be forced into a calculated, strategic alliance, condemned to spend the rest of her life as a silent, miserable trophy in a cold royal palace, just as her grandmother had planned. But the Sunbury princess was preparing to orchestrate a stunning, shocking rebellion. And she would do it far from the prying eyes of London, under the scorching, dusty sun of North Africa. In January 1905, the Duke and Duchess of Connaught embarked on a grand tour of the Mediterranean, bringing their two eligible daughters to Cairo, Egypt. It was there, amidst the exotic, intoxicating splendor of the Savoy Hotel, that the rigid royal script was completely and permanently torn to shreds. Behind closed doors, the Swedish royal court and British diplomats were actually aiming for a different match. They intended to marry Gustav Adolf to Daisy's sister, Patricia. Patricia possessed a more classical, traditional, and widely publicized beauty that fit the image of a future queen perfectly. That was the cold political plan. But in a scandalous, instantaneous departure from royal expectations, Gustav Adolf completely bypassed his intended bride. He was instantly, hopelessly captivated by Margaret. Gustav was a serious, deeply intellectual man. He wasn't a playboy prince. He was passionately devoted to archaeology, science, and the ancient ruins of the world. When he looked at Margaret, he didn't just see a pretty face or a political alliance. He found a brilliant intellectual equal. Their romance blossomed with shocking, almost reckless speed, completely ignoring the agonizingly slow protocols of royal courtship. Their first formal meeting took place at a lavish dinner hosted by the British consul, Lord Cromer. The Cairo air was thick with the scent of spices and the weight of history, and from that night on, they were absolutely inseparable. Margaret wrote in her private, closely guarded letters that she had finally found someone who truly understood her burning passion for art, nature, and truth. He didn't want to control her as a royal subject. He wanted to listen to her. He proposed right there in Cairo, under the romantic, starlit sky of Egypt. Margaret, in total defiance of the era's tradition of painfully long, politically negotiated engagements, accepted immediately. It was a marriage of true, searing love, a rare, almost forbidden luxury in the ruthless world of European aristocracy. They married on June 15, 1905, in the historic St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. It was the absolute apotheosis of British imperial luxury and power. The guest list read like a register of the world's most untouchable elites. Margaret looked breathtaking. She wore a dazzling gown of silk satin, richly adorned with priceless Honiton lace. This lace wasn't just a fashion choice. It was a carefully calculated political statement, commissioned specifically in Ireland to support local artisans and showcase the empire's benevolent influence. It was a fairy tale wedding, but the real, daunting test began when the honeymoon in Ireland ended and the couple boarded a ship heading north. Margaret was leaving the most powerful and expansive empire on earth for Sweden, a frozen, unfamiliar northern kingdom with a completely different language, a distinct culture, and a complex social structure. The Swedish court, steeped in its own ancient traditions, braced for impact. They fully expected a stiff, arrogant, demanding British princess who would look down on them and refuse to adapt. What they got was an absolute revolution. Margaret categorically refused to be a silent, decorative ornament. With a fierce, almost frightening determination, she set out to conquer her new world. Gifted with a phenomenal memory and an iron will, she mastered the complex Swedish language in record time. According to official records in the Swedish Biographical Dictionary, she made a shocking demand. She insisted that only Swedish be spoken in her new home. She refused to let her court cater to her British roots. She broke every protocol imaginable. She walked the cobblestone streets of Stockholm unaccompanied. She shopped at local markets without the suffocating presence of ladies-in-waiting. She spoke directly, openly, and warmly to the working class. In an era where old monarchies were beginning to crumble violently across Europe, Margaret understood that isolation was a death sentence for the crown. She became a living, pulsing bridge between the high throne and the common people. The Swedish public adored her, officially calling her Crown Princess Margareta, but to the masses on the streets, she was simply and universally known as the Sunbeam. But her most radical, convention-shattering rebellion was yet to come. It was her categorical refusal to follow the rules of royal motherhood. In quick succession, she gave birth to 5 children: Gustav Adolf, Sigvard, Ingrid, Bertil, and Carl Johan. In the Victorian tradition she was raised in, royal children were immediately handed over to an army of stern nannies, with parents seeing them for only a few formal minutes a day, dressed in stiff, flawless garments. But Margaret rejected this cold, detached upbringing entirely. She erased the concept of the invisible mother. She spent hours on the floor playing with her children, teaching them, and getting her own dresses stained with dirt. She believed that future rulers should be physically strong, empathetic, and closely connected to the raw realities of the physical world. She encouraged them to play sports, but she didn't just watch from the sidelines. Margaret was a powerhouse of physical energy. She was a superb, highly competitive tennis player and a skilled golfer. But most shockingly, she introduced women's bandy to Sweden, a fierce, fast-paced, highly physical form of ice hockey. She would put on skates herself and take to the ice, completely obliterating the stifling stereotype of the fragile princess fainting and sitting passively over embroidery. She proved that a woman could be a future queen and a fierce athlete simultaneously. And then there was her masterpiece, Sofiero Palace. Given to the couple as a wedding gift by King Oscar II, the estate was located in Helsingborg. When Margaret first arrived, the vast grounds were in a state of absolute, depressing neglect. Another princess might have hired an army of expensive landscape designers and retired to her quarters. Margaret saw a blank canvas. She approached the barren land not as a delicate royal, but as a professional botanist and a visionary artist. She personally studied soil types, complex botany, and the harsh, unpredictable Swedish climate. She designed the intricate terraces herself, calculating the exact angles of sunlight. She painstakingly selected and imported massive varieties of rhododendrons, planting them with her own hands until they transformed the estate into a blazing sea of color that made the palace world famous. Her horticultural work was so profound that she wrote 2 highly successful, groundbreaking books, Our Garden at Sofiero and From the Flower Garden. These weren't ghost-written royal fluff. They were serious, practical manuals illustrated with her own intimate photographs and vivid impressionist paintings. She taught an entire nation that a garden wasn't just a utilitarian vegetable plot. It was a living, breathing space for the soul, a shifting work of art. Her book sparked a mass gardening movement across Sweden that flourishes to this day. She had built a perfect, idyllic life. She had defeated the rigid royal system. But history has a cruel, unforgiving, and deeply ruthless way of punishing those who seem untouchable. In the late summer of 1914, the world tore itself apart. World War I erupted with unprecedented mechanical slaughter, and Margaret suddenly found herself trapped in an unbearable, suffocating nightmare. Sweden remained officially, staunchly neutral. But Margaret's personal and political position was incredibly dangerous. She was sitting on a razor's edge. Think of the blood flowing through her veins. She was British by birth. She was half German through her mother. And she was married to the future king of a neutral Scandinavian power. Her own family members, her cousins, her uncles, the people she played with as a child, were now actively ordering the destruction of one another across the barbed wire trenches. The psychological pressure from the international press and a paranoid public was immense and crushing. Every move she made was scrutinized for treason. A weaker woman would have hidden behind the thick walls of the palace, keeping her head down until the guns fell silent. But Margaret turned her royal neutrality into a weapon. She channeled all her paralyzing anxiety into a massive, clandestine, and highly effective humanitarian operation. First, she founded the Crown Princess's Sewing Circle, a nationwide initiative that mobilized the women of Sweden to produce thousands of uniforms, blankets, and essential supplies for freezing soldiers and refugees. But her most stunning, dangerous achievement was turning her own royal court into what became known as the Central Post Office of Europe. Using her elite royal connections, her impeccable diplomatic immunity, and a network of trusted couriers, she secretly facilitated the transfer of tens of thousands of letters and packages between prisoners of war and their desperate, grieving families in Britain and Germany. It was a colossal, exhausting, and extremely delicate undertaking. She personally and tirelessly searched for missing soldiers through the Red Cross, working deep into the night. She sent warm clothes to British prisoners freezing in German camps and delivered desperate letters from German mothers to sons held by the British. She was a vital, pulsing artery for thousands of starving, terrified men who had been swallowed whole by the war machine. In the filthy, disease-ridden, blood-soaked trenches of Europe, her name was spoken with absolute reverence by soldiers on both sides of the conflict. She was their only link to the world of the living. She survived the Great War. It seemed she had overcome every impossible obstacle, every political trap, and every cultural barrier thrown at her. The world was finally at peace. Empires had fallen, and a new, tranquil chapter of her life was supposed to begin. But in the bitter, frost-nipped spring of 1920, a silent, invisible, and deeply insidious killer breached the heavily guarded walls of the Stockholm Palace. Margaret was 38 years old. Her immune system was physically shattered by years of relentless, agonizing humanitarian work and the crushing stress of the war. And to add to her vulnerability, she was 8 months pregnant with her 6th child. It started with something so incredibly ordinary, so mundane that it seemed completely harmless. Her older children contracted chickenpox. In any other royal household of that era, the protocol was strict and unyielding. The infected children would have been immediately isolated under the care of a full staff of nurses, and the pregnant crown princess would have been tucked safely away in a different wing of the palace. But, as we know, Margaret was not a traditional royal. In her typical, fiercely devoted, hands-on fashion, she flatly refused to step back. She refused to let cold, clinical nannies take over the care of her sick children. She remained by their bedsides day and night, wiping their fevered brows and nursing them with her own hands. It was an act of pure, unconditional, beautiful maternal love, but it was a fatal, irreversible mistake. Margaret contracted the virus. In her severely weakened, heavily pregnant state, the infection didn't just run its course. It mutated rapidly and aggressively. What began as a simple, itchy childhood illness traveled deep into her ear canal, developing into a severe, agonizing case of mastoiditis. In 1920, before the life-saving discovery of modern antibiotics, This diagnosis was a brutal, agonizing death sentence. The infection raged out of control. Desperate, panicked doctors rushed to perform emergency surgery on May 1st to clear the infection from her skull. But they were fighting a losing, horrifying battle. Lethal sepsis, massive blood poisoning, had already surged through her veins, shutting down her organs one by one. On the very day the city of Stockholm was joyously preparing to celebrate the bright, hopeful arrival of spring, the heart of the Sunbeam princess simply stopped. The shockwave that hit Sweden was unprecedented in its modern history. The entire nation fell into a deep, visceral, and devastating mourning. The flawless, stoic facade of the monarchy cracked completely as prime ministers, hardened politicians, factory workers, and aristocrats openly wept together in the streets. They weren't just mourning a distant, wealthy princess. They were mourning the woman who had spent 15 years stepping down from her throne to become one of them. But even in death, Margaret defied the rigid, somber rules of the monarchy. As a final, profound act of defiance, she had clearly written in her last will and testament that she categorically refused to be buried in the dark, gloomy stone royal vaults of the Riddarholmen Church, where Swedish monarchs had rested for centuries. She demanded to be buried under the open sky, surrounded by the nature, the trees, and the blinding light she loved so much. Her wish was granted. She was laid to rest at the Royal Cemetery in Haga Park. She was the very first royal to find peace there, a beautiful, sweeping tradition that the Swedish monarchy continues to this day. Her heartbroken husband, Gustav Adolf, was utterly inconsolable. He lived a very long, dedicated life, eventually ascending the throne as King Gustav VI Adolf. But he never, ever forgot his Margaret. He kept her memory alive in the gardens they built together. Today, her legacy isn't just locked away in the dusty pages of history books. It is alive. Her bloodline flows directly through the current, modern monarchs of both Sweden and Denmark. Queen Margareta II of Denmark and King Carl XVI. Gustav of Sweden are her direct descendants. Margaret of Connaught remains a shining example of a princess who refused to be a mere political pawn. She was a true bridge between the monarchy and the people. Her story reminds us that while the human will can change the rules of society and survive the horrors of war, the fragility of life spares no one, not even those who wear a crown. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and hit the like button. What aspect of Margaret's life surprised you the most? Her wartime spy network or her defiance of royal protocol? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.